Hello, everyone. Welcome to another day of life over here. We are so happy to have you. Yes, I know that we have some new folks here, so let's just do a little brief introduction. My name is Sadie Uribe, and I am the media producer for the Los Angeles Regional SBDC Network. The SBDC is a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country to help stimulate economic growth through business advising and development. The LASBDC offers no-cost services through funding provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. It's your tax dollars at work. Well, the Los Angeles Regional SBDC network operates 7 service locations throughout Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Our services are also offered virtually. We are here to help. We empower small businesses owners by offering tailored solutions through personalized one-on-one business advising, cutting-edge workshops, and comprehensive programs, all provided at no cost. We are dedicated to supporting your entrepreneurial journey every step of the way. We help businesses at every stage. And I'm going to let you guys read that because I know we got a lot of new folks and they need some information, Lori. So, Lori, what are we not going to be talking about today? I guess maybe that is what I'm going to be asking you.
I think that's a good question, Sadie. By the way, I love the new look. Yes, what are we not going to be talking about today? We have a lot to talk about. So I am going to jump into it immediately with my presentation because I want to use every minute I can to get through some information out there. So just as a quick statement, as I go through it, I'm going to be doing a combination of the show everybody's expected and have loved for so long. But the first couple minutes, I am at the beginning where I always say words of wisdom. We're going to do a lot of announcements about resources and a reach out to those in the disaster area, which my heart goes out to everybody. But as I have been saying throughout it, it is everybody is affected, whether they're directly affected because they're in the area or we're indirectly affected by knowing people and emotions as well as indirectly by businesses and customers. We're all in this together. So let me get started with some of my announcements, and then what's going to happen is Sadie is going to be going like crazy putting links in the chat for me. I got a ton of them and she's just going to be flying like crazy putting all these links in. So one of the things I want to mention is starting this week, and it's myself who is doing this, there's going to be update on the loans available and an ability to ask questions through a Q&A. This is going to be on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Friday. We did one yesterday. We're doing one tomorrow at 11 a.m. Sadie is putting that link in right now, and it's going to be me. Sadie's going to be there. Also, Ted is going to be a representative from the lead center. He is there, and we are going to be available to answer any questions as well as give updates about the SBA loans, etc. So what I'm trying to say that any of the questions directed towards that, this is a whole hour for that program. The end of the month, I've got the what is the best legal structure for my company and the tax advantages. My financial series, I'm just behind on scheduling. It's been crazy. I will get that out to you next week, as well as a couple more webinars that are coming up. But until we know how long we're going to be holding these will be held, and you can tune in at any time period and ask Sadie any questions in the chat about how to access it, etc. Okay, tons of links that Sadie's going to put in. So the first link is going to be to the SBA to apply for the disaster loans. There's also a link that she's going to be putting in that is the disaster declaration search. These loans require that you be in the defined disaster areas. So you first want to check for eligibility. You want to look to see if your area is covered through the map. Then you can go through the SBA website and you can apply. To apply, you want to go through the My Portal. It just requires ID and a couple documents to begin the application. If you're in that area and wanting to apply for either a business physical disaster, an EIDL, or home disaster loan, please join us tomorrow. We'll be getting into the specifics. There are many organizations that are providing a lot of links to resources. I've been going through them every day to try to collect valuable links. I came upon one through an associate from Cal Chamber resource link. It was so inclusive, I wanted to provide it to you. And as one of their links is through the LA Economic Development Center, LAEDC, one of our partners in California that speaks specifically to businesses. They have a great aggregate, a great collection of links specific to business. So I wanted to give you that as well. I do have the SBA disaster loan application link, and also from the IRS. The IRS has two bits of information I wanted to pass along. One of them is for the California wildlife victims to qualify for tax relief. You have deadlines that are postponed. And then also, although we don't necessarily want to do that, sometimes we have to access our retirement accounts. And so there's a link to the IRS on how to go about that, what will be the situations, what type of penalties are averted at this time period. Then lastly, Sadie will put in my email throughout this show, as she always does. But if you need more information on any of this, like I said, the show I'm just using as an announcement, but we will have following support on more information. Now, next week, we have Nicole, goes by Coco, coming up with Coco's Lip Smacking Cupcakes. Fascinating story about going from baking at home to starting a brick and mortar. In the end of the month on the 29th, Mia Anderson's going to come on from Hardcore Sport. She's going to talk a lot about her trials and tribulations through the COVID disaster and how she's had to restart and refigure where she's going. And in that content in February, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit, I have been trying to determine how I can best assist people and use the show as a way to do so. And I decided and thought about it a lot. And guys, please put your thoughts in the chat. I feel as though what we really need once we get past the disaster, the next thing that's always needed in any disaster, and we've been alive on planet Earth, I think we can relate to this, is a series of hope, a series of where do we go from here? And I know myself personally, whenever I have wanted to see a better tomorrow, I love to have inspirational stories from people who have overcome odds. I mean, that's the whole concept of this show and why people love it. We're hearing from our fellow peeps on what they did to start their company. So that isn't outside what we do on the show, but I'm going to create special series and starting February with people who have just overcome all kinds of obstacles to persevere in their company. And like I said, Mia's, kind of starting us off here because she's still in it real time. Ted Milner has been on the show before as well as his daughter, and he started his company, as on top of my head, I might be saying it wrong, but it's somewhere around 1989 or something. And he is just by nature a motivational person. I just love him to death. That's part of his nature. And so he's going to come on and talk about his company. Executive Temps is the staffing agency, I should say, to Hollywood. And he's going to talk about just different experiences he had, not only through his company, through his lifetime. So he is going to start us off. And then, like I said, I'm going to have messages of hope and inspiration. We're going to talk about overcoming challenges, perseverance, ability to keep going, seeing opportunity in challenging situations. So if you have yourself or any guest speakers that you say, this would be awesome, we would love to come on the show and talk about it, please reach out to me. Sadie, stick my email address in the chat again, because I would love to reach out beyond my, I'm going to use an old word, Rolodex. That's a really old word, but beyond my contacts to my audience on anyone you think that might be able to offer what I believe is a much needed message at all times, but especially this time. Okay, with that, I'm very excited to bring on, I would just say, my returning champion guest, Xiomara, who's been on the show too many times for me to even count. And every time I talk with her prior to the show, I am already saying to her, and we'll be on the show again, because every topic that we have involves HR. So, Xiomara, and Xiomara, I'm just going to have you come on and introduce yourself and your company. I'm not even going to do an introduction for you. We're going to do it all at once to save some time here. Okay?
All
How's
right.
that?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I love being on the show. I love returning and just bringing that source of information for people to know what's going on in the world of HR. I've been in human resources for 15 years, CEO and founder of Solvit HR, and I've worked with a small business community for, I'd say, about half my career now, and loving every second of it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. How I got started in transition into the small business community, or how I ended up where I'm at now. I used to work as a consultant for one of these large payroll companies, like the ADPs of the world type of deal. And there I really got to kind of experience a day in the life of an entrepreneur, a business owner. And never in my career, up to that point, had I seen so many claims for things that were just preventable, like small things, claims from the labor commissioner, claims from at that time the DFEH, now the California Civil Rights Department. Um, just things that wouldn't make it to the desk of like a larger organization, because right, they have an HR department usually that helps with all these things, helps prevent, any of these claims. Um, and at that time, I just felt like, gosh, like these small businesses, they just don't know what they don't know. At the
Yeah.
time, they you're there to open a business. HR compliance is the last thing in your mind, right? You work on your marketing, you work on scaling your business. You eventually start growing and start hiring people and just keep going. And a lot of times, you don't realize you have not complied with the law until, one of these claims comes through. And unfortunately, in the state of California, a lot of times employees are very savvy with these laws, even more so than the actual business owners or managers or supervisors. And so that's kind of what led me into venturing on my own. I just felt like it was a call. It was a calling for me. I felt like, these people are just so vulnerable. They don't know what they don't know. They're getting hit left and right, losing profits, losing time and energy from like focusing on growing their business. And so I decided to go on my own as my own consulting firm, Solvit HR, work with the small to mid-sized businesses and help them, remain profitable by avoiding penalties and helping them create thriving workplace cultures for their employees.
So true what you're saying. I mean, I've been around a long time and we always had an awareness that HR mattered, but the rules were so minor, meaning the number of rules we had to keep up with. It was something that you just didn't have to spend a lot of time on. You made sure you got your payroll right and a couple things that were pretty much
Yeah,
obvious, but that has completely changed.
yeah.
And now it's almost as if, in my mind, HR has moved up equal with finance because both are very big vulnerabilities. And so I agree with you. And I think the trend is continuing to get it more and more difficult. We're not trending into more simplicity. And with that, I want to kind of go through a couple things. One thing I want to mention too right away is that we are very fortunate at Pasadena SBDC to have you as an advisor to Pasadena SBDC. So there's going to be a webinar coming up that you're offering. You always offer webinars. I'm going to get Sadie to put that link in the chat right away so we know about it. So Samara, let's start out first and then just kind of mention this. I mentioned that the IRS has a changed deadline for some of the forms that you have to file for those in the disaster area. Can you mention what ADD is doing for those in the disaster area so we're having awareness? And Sadie, can you put the link in the chat as she's talking about it?
Yeah, so EDD has actually provided an extension for employers to file their payroll tax for those that were due. I think the deadline was by the end of the month. So they have now up to 2 months to be able to file for those payroll taxes and the reports that they submit to EDD. But they do need to go online and file for that extension. It's not just automatic. Um,
Okay.
I don't want to mislead people, but yeah, they do need to go on EDD's website, file for the extension, and then they get up to 2 months of time to be able to eventually submit their payroll tax and the reports.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you for letting us know on that. So as we talk about some of the new HR laws that are coming in, well, here it's January, I'm losing track of time, that are in existence, right? I also want to touch on some of them that we may not be aware of. I know we're going to kind of go back between independent contractor and also people who have employees, because you just have to in this conversation. It toggles back and forth. I want to start out by talking about, just so people are aware of the concept of what AB5 is, and I want to talk about the new contract requirement for independent contractors, because I think that a lot of our audience does hire independent contractors and has to have an awareness. So how about we just start with that little segment with what is AB5 and what is the new requirement on contracts when you have an independent contractor?
Yeah, that's excellent, because if I had to say what the most common mistake I see businesses make is misclassifying their workers as
Yep.
independent contractors. I'd say that's the number one mistake I see people make. And, as I mentioned, because when you're running a business, you eventually are going to grow and bring on people, but not necessarily know the rules of engagement in that regard. So AB5 goes back to 2020, when right before COVID hit, actually. And when COVID hit, it kind of got lost in, somewhere. But AB5, what it did is that it created a new test that employers need to utilize in order to properly classify a worker as an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. So essentially, this law almost made it impossible to classify anyone as an independent contractor. It created the ABC test. And the ABC test looks at three different things in order for someone to be considered a true independent contractor. Number one, or A, I should say, the exertion of control over the worker. So are you telling them what time they should show up for work? Are you telling them, what deadlines they have? Are you asking them to utilize your equipment to get the work done? Are you giving them direction, supervising them, giving them a performance evaluation, those kind of things, right? Exertion of control. Then prong B looks at that the work that they perform has to be outside of the course of the hiring entity's business. So for example, if you are a retail company, you hire a plumber, that's someone outside the scope of the business, right? They're not in the retail business, they're a plumber. Or if you are, for example, a finance company, and you hire an HR person, right? It's not in the same line of business. But when it is within the same line of business, then that person is likely considered an employee of the company.
And on that, Xiomara, if I may interrupt for a second, I don't know if this is still on the website, because this was when they first were launching it, but they had an example. And I like to express this example because it shows how far they go to consider it still normal course of business. Their example was, if you have a bakery and you have somebody at their home creating a recipe, they're just selling you a recipe for you to go make your cakes, that is considered part of the normal course of business, because that recipe is going to be used in the cake. And then they had the example, if you have a computer person fixing it. So my point I'm wanting to say is that you really have to look way beyond the immediate, oh no, this is just somebody who created a recipe one time and bought it, which I would have thought maybe was an independent contractor, and technically it's not. And I think B is the component of this we have to spend most time focusing on, because that's the defining difference between what had been in place before. Any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So anything that it would be considered part of the operations of the business, a key part of the operations, then that person would likely be considered an employee of the business, because they are an essential component to the business being profitable. you have that example. I also want to talk about this real life example we had with a client from SBDC that
Please
reached
do, because that
out
one
a while
shocked me.
ago.
Please do.
It is shocking because, just when you think, okay, maybe they're not part of the business, the determination is made. And I want people to understand too that there are several different agencies that look at the independent contractor classification and may have variations of what is considered an independent contractor and what's not. So the IRS has one, the Department of Labor at the federal level has one, our Employment Development Department has one. And so this client that I helped was audited by the Employment Development Department because, as you may recall, during COVID, a lot of people were filing for unemployment insurance or registering on EDD's radar. And they were like, wait a minute, you are an employee of this company, but we don't have payroll records for you. What's going on here? So the business was this business owner, she was in the garment industry, so she designed clothing, and then as part of that, she also sold makeup and a lot of the like fashion, I would say like a fashion industry type of business. And she had hired two models to basically promote her makeup, like like mascara and just regular makeup. And these models had other clients. They had a website, right? So they were out to business on their own. And basically EDD said, nope, they should have been your employees because they are an integral part of your business. They are promoting your products. And without that, you would lose profit. Your business would lose profit. So, long story short, this person ended up paying about $20,000 worth of penalty for, payroll taxes, the penalty. And this was after negotiating, and at the same time, when you get audited by EDD, I said she tried to fight them, right? And I said, this is not the time. Let's not fight this one. Like, this is not the time to actually, I totally understand, like, just feels unfair. But, going back to what you said, it's, HR sometimes gets put in the back burner. And not until these kind of things happen do we realize how important, compliance with HR is, because it can be a slippery road.
It can be because, couple things on that. Yeah, that situation really surprised me because I would not have guessed that that would have been considered to have to be an employee. And I think this is also a good time to bring in the fact that a lot of the interpretation of all our laws, but we're talking about AB5, is the precedents that are set in court. So with this being a precedent, it becomes kind of a snowball effect saying, well, how else could this precedence be applied? And with this situation, not only do you get the penalties, but you have the cost as if you would have had them as an employee, overtime breaks. So the amount that one has to pay isn't just like, okay, you didn't file this form on time or you're late on your taxes.
Yeah.
It can snowball with a whole bunch of old numbers. And I want to repeat something that you said at the very beginning, and I find this to be so true. It is almost impossible with this rule in California to have somebody be an independent contractor in the capacity of assisting in any capacity in your company other than, fixing my computer or being a plumber. And unfortunately, that is the key reason you hire an independent contractor, because you're not at a level where you can afford an employee and you really don't need a full-time employee or even a part-time, and you just want somebody to help you to get to that next level. That little component has been kind of taken away from California companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, in the eyes of the law, people are considered employees unless you can prove these three prongs from the ABC test. And even I want to make a disclaimer. Even when they meet all the criteria from the ABC test, we still have the original independent contractor test in place
Yeah.
to look at. So when there is an exemption from the ABC test, so there are many exemptions for, some industries and, for certain positions. So even when there is an exemption from the ABC test, we got to look at the Borrello test, the original, the common law test, which had been in place since the 80s, I'd say.
Wasn't that Microsoft that kind of, stemmed from the beginning of that? You know me, I'm always enough to be dangerous, right?
You,
I always say that.
you're more than dangerous, Lori.
People say, how do you know so much? I'm like, I've been alive on planet Earth a long time.
Yes.
But yeah, now one of the things that is new, and I don't even have my head around this yet. So let's pretend now we are talking about somebody, I'm hiring somebody to come in and do my plumbing or my computer. Okay. So it is acceptable to be an independent contractor. Am I correct that I may have to have some document between them now or something? What's going on with that? I have not kept up. Tell me how that rule works.
So as of the first of this year, we did have a law that went into effect, that requires now all employers, all companies hiring an independent contractor or freelancer for professional services, that is going to provide work or perform services of more than $250. Now they're required to have an agreement in writing, basically stipulating the scope of work, when they are going to be compensated, and if it's not listed on the contract, the compensation is not listed on the contract, it is assumed that the payment should be given to the freelancer within 30 days of them completing the work or completing the services.
Okay, so now let's walk through this a little bit. So back me up. I just want to hire a independent contractor, someone who's great at fixing computers. He has or does not have a company, a legal structure like an LLC, so I'll let you go in both directions. It's going to cost me more than 250. Am I, as the employer, the one responsible for presenting this contract? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay. I don't like
Um,
that answer, but okay. So
yes,
what I'm
you.
saying to all, I'm going to say it again, and maybe get a different answer. So I have to say to my audience, everybody out there, you have to be conscious of any money that you're spending on people that you're hiring for professional services, not vendors buying raw materials or redo, but anyone you hire. So would this be true? Like if I even am hiring, I'm asking because I don't know, so I'm asking a silly question. What if I hire a bookkeeper? Does this mean I got to have a contract?
Yeah, so it's professional services, all the ones that are under the AB5 law that are considered
Okay.
as professional services. So there is a list of, what those services look like. So we have marketing, we have HR, we have graphic design, um, we have writers.
Writers, I think. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
seeing writers. Okay.
Um,
So in that, now correct me if I'm wrong on this one, and please, I may be wrong. Does this then give the independent contractor some, I'm just going to use the word validation because I don't have another word right now. I don't want to put a legal word in there yet, to go after me if I don't pay him in 30 days and it's stipulated 30 days? Is this suddenly bringing the courts into my payables on independent contractor relationships?
Yes. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, I don't want to scare people, but this is the reality and this is the law. A few years back, I think around 2022, we had a law. So I don't want to confuse people, but well, I'll finish this and then I'll go back to this what I want to see. So we had a law go into effect that made it grand theft for any business that didn't compensate an independent contractor for the services performed. For services performed, I think it was over 900 and some dollars. So that would be considered now ground theft if someone didn't compensate or didn't pay this independent contractor for the services they performed. Yeah, so more and more we are seeing laws going to effect to protect independent contractors because, as you know why the penalties are so hefty and why the laws are so stringent is because historically, when someone is classified as an independent contractor, essentially they are exempt from all the employment law protections. So they basically don't have any protections as an employee. So for example, they wouldn't get paid sick leave, right? They would be exempt from benefits the employer may provide. They are exempt from overtime and meal and rest periods. They are exempt from, Cal OSHA and safety regulations. Essentially, they are basically exempt from every law. Not every law, but
But
close.
a lot of them,
Yeah.
it's so funny. Like I said, again, I've been alive for a long time. And I've been in business for myself for many, many decades. It was always my understanding, even when I was in my late 20s, was that was kind of a risk that we all took and a choice. Okay, I'm not going to be an employee. I'm going to be an independent contractor. I get to do this, but I
Mm.
don't get this in return. It's like that taking on personal
Yeah.
risk and is
Yeah.
not part of the equation anymore. If I could
Yeah.
just make that general statement, that's a Lori statement.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more laws going to effect because, as many of know, the gig economy is growing significantly every year.
Yeah.
And so all these laws are stemming out of people not being paid for work that they are performing, unfortunately. People are losing protections, experiencing maybe discrimination, things like that. And so we are seeing more laws now protecting freelancers. And so that's why in recent years we are seeing, like this one we have with the contract, and now it's a requirement. The one with the, making it considering it grand theft, not to compensate an independent contractor for
Wow.
performing services after a certain amount. Um, yeah, the law does provide protection for them for like sexual harassment. That's still applicable to independent contractors. Ideally, you also want to make sure that they have workers' compensation insurance so that you're not liable in case of
I see
anything.
that situation a lot in like construction when you hire subcontractors or something like that. If you don't have the workman's comp, it's interesting because and this is just a Lori statement. Then there's something else I want to get for clarification for our audience, but it's like there is such high risk being a business owner that there never used to be. I mean, there always was the risk of, am I going to make it? Am I going to go out of business? And things like sexual harassment, I can totally support that going all the way across, absolutely. But when it comes to, okay, make sure you pay in 30 days or they can go to a set of lawyers through the state and automatically sue, that brings up so much because maybe the person didn't perform, maybe this, it brings a whole new level. One of the things I do want to do is a clarification real quickly based on some of the questions in the chat that I'm seeing is we are talking about AB5, we are talking about California state. So therefore, things like 1099s and things like W9s, that's federal. That hasn't changed at all. You still need a W-9, but that's for federal purposes for taxes. And you still need a 1099. That's for federal purposes for taxes. We're talking about law specific to California. Not that it's never going to change on that, but that answers a couple questions about 1099s and W-9s. Those, it didn't change, and that's on a federal level.
Yeah.
Before we leave the contract, is there any information that's available to us that tells us, you mentioned a few things on the contract, but does the state have anything like go here and look at this template and make sure it at least says this? How do you know that the contract you're providing is sufficient to what the requirements are now? That's really my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't seen a template being created, but the actual law does provide a listing of all the things that are required to be included, such
Okay.
as I mentioned, the compensation, the scope of the work, the deadline, the names of the parties. That's pretty basic, pretty obvious. I do have a website that people can go to for questions with AB5, so I will drop that in the chat.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, I'm helping my clients, because I know some of them do hire independent contractors, more frequently and sometimes against my advice.
Yeah, well,
But,
we
they
know that
have
because of necessity.
they have
Yeah,
the right to run their business how they want, and they're to
I agree
support.
on that. I
I'm
agree
there
on
to
a
support.
necessity. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I think that on the positive, because I like to look at the positive, I think I always tell people that having a contract in place, even if it's an email, when you put it in writing, it helps clarity, and clarity helps expectations, which helps keep you out of court anyway. So
yeah.
I'm all for having something in writing. I'm just necessarily not liking to get the courts involved in my little small businesses drag through things when they got enough to worry about. So that's but that's a Lori position, and that's, nobody really asked me. So I just get
Yeah,
to
and
say,
again, the agreement is, yeah, I agree with you that it's always good to have something in writing, because if you don't have something in writing, sometimes even when you do, you don't want to end up at the labor commissioner's office for them to try to determine whether this person was or was not an employee, because at that time the odds are stacked against you.
they are,
I
and I've gone up against the EDD for clients on many occasions, and you kind of have to understand that you're probably losing before you get started. As
yeah,
a business, you just do. I'm not trying to be negative against the EDD, but that's something you have to be conscious. Is this worth my time, etc.? And that's kind of how you have to go about it. So, so now we kind of understand the independent contract route, and we also understand that it may not be an option for many, if hardly any, to have an independent contractor for what you're really wanting to hire them as. And I'm going to make one little side comment before I go on the next question. I always tell people that I don't care if you're just selling, a cookie at a farmer's market. We must think of ourselves, and I'll explain what I mean by this, but we must think of ourselves as departments. Like a corporation has an HR department, a legal department, a finance, accounting. We're not going to have huge departments. It could be just us, but we have to act as if we are needing to engage in the activities that are being done in those departments. Because I don't care if you don't have a department, you have HR activities, you have legal activities. And so there's no such thing as a small company that just gets to focus on Instagram and marketing. It's
yeah,
all the departments are intact.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay,
agree with
so
you
now that
wholeheartedly.
you gave us that wonderful news, how about we go down another road? So I wanted to just hire one employee. Is there some new rules about my hiring of one employee that I need to be aware of?
Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure you at least pay the minimum wage. I'd say that you'd
Yep.
be have the upper hand
Yeah.
to pay them at least minimum wage. We have minimum wage increase to 16.50 an hour for the state of California, but also keep in mind that many cities and unincorporated areas of LA County have their own ordinance that is higher than the state's minimum wage. And
Okay.
I I'd say even if you're not based in those areas, but you do have employees perform work in those areas, general rule, I think across the ordinances is more than 2 hours in a work week. You have to compensate them that ordinance is minimum wage.
Is there
So
any website that gives us those wages for all of the areas, or you have to go on specific websites to find that out? I'm assuming you have to go on the local websites, right?
yeah, you would have to go
Yeah,
to the local city
that's
website.
what I thought. Okay.
Most of these
Just
cities
thought I'd
that
ask.
have most of these cities that have these ordinances, they have it on their website. So I'll list the cities just in case, people have anyone working there. So Pasadena, we have Malibu, we have Santa Monica, we have West Hollywood, and gosh, one of them escaping me because I know it's Oh, and unincorporated LA County and City of Los Angeles. So
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So now there's this thing, another new thing. I know enough to be dangerous, but Cal Savers has come into effect, which I'm going to just say what I think it is, and you're going to clarify. So it has to do with providing retirement account type access, but it doesn't mean, from my understanding, that the company is setting up the retirement account. It's just having to inform your employees of its existence through the state. Which part did I get wrong? That at least sets it for to
No,
explain what that
you're
is.
right. You're right on
Okay.
track.
Okay.
So it is a retirement account, an IRA account for employees. So essentially, all the employer needs to do is register with CalSavers. What is changing or what is going into effect this year is that it's trickling all the way down to those that have at least one employee.
Okay.
So this is something that's been in the works for 5 years now, actually, since about 2020. It started with those with 50 and then trickled down to 25, then 15, then 5, and then now we have it applied to everybody basically. So all you do is go into the CalSavers website, and then again, that's another link I'll share with everyone. But you go into CalSavers and register with them. And what you're doing as the employer is basically you are like the middle guy that's just remitting the deductions, the contributions the employee is making into the retirement account, and you're sending those to CalSavers every pay period or every time you process the payroll.
Gotcha. Can I bring up something that's always a concern to me? So this is a Lori thing, and you tell me whether you think or not, okay? So when we talk about gathering money from a employee through a payroll and submitting, I don't care if you're talking about payroll taxes or what we're talking about with retirement, red flags go off to me because I know that if you don't get that accounting correct, including the remitting amount, that comes under civil liability. That's piercing corporate veils. And it's my personal belief, Xiomara, that too many people are hiring doing it themselves, not so much, but hiring companies that really don't have the expert understanding of payroll. I tend to be an old timer that likes ADP and paychecks. This is just my personal opinion because they do keep up on California laws. So I'm going to get to the point. I'm scared to death that a small company will get something wrong and not remit the correct part to that retirement. And that seems like you could go down pretty hard for that mistake. Is Lori being extreme? Comment
No,
on it,
Lori's
please.
not being extreme. I've actually seen it. I actually, as I mentioned, used to work for like, one of those payroll companies back in the day. And I remember one time, mistakes are made, right? We're not
Yep.
perfect. I remember one time the tax department made a huge mistake and failed to file payroll taxes for a client. And they ended up incurring the penalty from EDD and
Yep.
from the IRS.
And it's a fraudulent thing. I have a client that everybody that touched payroll, because that's how the IRS's rules is, everybody that touches it goes down basically. And his children were involved in putting in envelopes and all that, and they all have liens and fraud.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that. And I know when it comes to retirement, I have a 401k individual for my corporation, which Lori's an employee. It's an S Corp and Lori is an employer. And I get all these nasty notes to Lori, the employer, making sure I follow and get Lori, the employee, the right amount. And I know that even I'm the same person, but I have actually been in CFO positions where I've had to touch the setting up of 401ks for corporations. Not something I like to do, but I have gone through the rulings and the amount of requirement. Now, I'm not saying that companies have to go through that component, but I'm just saying make sure that amount gets remitted. You really
Yeah.
have to get a good, strong payroll company.
You got to have your eyes on the money.
Yeah.
And payroll is money. And like you said, a lot of people delegate that because I mean it is tedious, it is complicated. And if you do have an expert to help with that, excellent. That's great. But make sure you're actually looking at reports and you are reviewing your payroll on a regular basis, because I'll tell you, Lori, in my years of experience, payroll fraud is a thing, and
Yeah.
people they don't realize like you can even commit fraud with payroll. I
Yeah.
once had a client who um, hired someone to process payroll for him, and what this person was doing is basically like adding like ghost employees
Uh,
with her account, with her bank account. And then
oh,
whenever someone would also terminate employment, she wouldn't terminate them in the system. She would just change their bank account to her account. So every
wow.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
outside of that, like I had somebody who used a payroll company and the company went belly up and didn't remit the taxes. And so at the end of the day, the employers are responsible. I want to talk a second about checking the reports because, I just want to say it this way to let everybody know. So as a CFO or in larger companies, what happens is at the end of the year, even when you have your tax preparers for bigger companies, they pull the payroll accounts at wherever you have it. They pull the internal reports of how much you submitted and they cross-reference. So part of a accounting department financial auditing at the end of the year is to make sure, oh, I think we should have paid in a total of this in payroll taxes. Oh, yes, the report directly from the US Treasury matches. They're matching these reports. Small companies don't do that. They don't even know to. And that's where I think we've gone to get a little bit more savvy within our reports. And another way of me saying that, even when you use an ADP and they send this huge stack, I know they do, I've gone through it many times, don't just file it without having an understanding of what those pages mean.
yeah, absolutely. Payroll fraud, I can't stress it enough. It's a thing that it just never crosses like business owners' minds, because they're just like, oh, okay, well, this person, it might look the same, right? Like the people that are doing the fraud, they're very savvy to where they're gonna make the numbers look the same, right? So I I can't not stress it enough. Like review your payroll information, review. This is where like HR and payroll merge, right? Like when you terminate employees, make sure you are terminating those employees in the system, in your payroll system as well. Not only for payroll, it just trickles so many systems, right? Or so many things, because when you leave them on the payroll and they're no longer working for you, there you have an extra employee. Now you potentially have other laws apply to you because your employee count might be higher than than it actually is. That may trigger other laws to apply to you. You also would have them like we have the workers' comp insurance. The premium, you still be paying it because they're still on your payroll, or like the health benefits, health insurance, all those things. So making sure that you terminate this employee in the system, it's actually being thorough and making sure all your reports align, right? You're not going to have a report down the line that this person continued to get paid after their termination date. And
Yep, exactly.
yeah.
Yep. One of the things I want to make sure I understand correctly. So if I have now many of our clients do not, but if I have a 401 or some kind of retirement in place, then I do not have to offer the Cal Savers. Like, is it always got to be offered? Or if I don't have a policy in place?
If you don't have
That's what
already
I thought.
a
Okay, that's why I
retirement
just
plan.
wanted to
Yeah.
clarify. We did get a
Yeah,
question on
thanks for
that.
clarifying that. Yeah, so either you provide your own retirement plan, like a 401k, 403b, or if you don't have one, then you go in and register with, well, you got to register with CalSavers either way. If you do have a plan, you just let them know you already have a plan and you're already complying. If you don't
And
have a plan, you register and then start remitting those deductions. One thing I may say too is that the employees have the option to opt out
yeah,
from the plan as well. So it's not mandatory, that the employees have to contribute. It is really up to them, but it is mandatory for the employer to basically register and report, either yay or nay if they're in compliance already, or if they're signing up for CalSavers.
Well, to save you from any trick questions, Jet, I'm going to make sure I go through the time we have. Is there any other ones that are now affecting just the hiring of one, or big ones for the hiring of people that we need? I know we're going to have you back on. That's a given, because I think there's just a lot happening right now. So it warrants more than one show. But is there anything else on this show that, even if it's just a listing, you want us to know about?
Um, let's see. Yeah, there's quite a few. I'm going to cover most of them next week on that webinar. But yeah, basically laws that apply to all those with at least one employee. Make sure that you have all your posters in place too. A lot of the postings are being updated. We had quite a few updated last year, and then some more being updated this year. Now employers also are not able to require a driver's license on their as a requirement, as a job requirement on their job ads, for recruiting employees as
I
well.
wanted to ask you about that. So I may have this wrong. So guys, don't listen to my words. Listen to what Xiomara says. So you don't have to or can't ask for a driver's license when they're applying, but when they actually become an employee, you still have to, because that's part of the requirement to collect the data, or not. So correct me on that. The difference between applying and then after you hire them.
Yeah, so basically this law prohibits the driver's license as a requirement to be considered for the job. So your job
Okay.
ads, you cannot ask for it, all that. Unless, I mean, there's always an exception to the rule, right? Unless driving is an
Yep.
essential part of the job, blah, blah, blah. What you're talking about, the driver's license or the ID is for the I-9 form, the employment
Yes.
eligibility
Yes.
form. So when
That's
you
what I'm talking
hire
about.
someone, when you become an employer in the US, and this is a federal requirement, you have to have employees fill out an employment eligibility form, aka an I-9 form. And on there, that form is going to have a listing of the acceptable documents for someone to be able to prove that they have the authorization to work in the US. Driver's license is one of the documents they can present. So you have identity documents, and then you have work authorization documents, and then you have a list of like documents that are both, like such as the passport, you know. So yeah, so the driver's license or ID, that's one of the documents that employees can present. And I just want to let people know too that you cannot require, or you cannot request specific documents from the employees. That is considered, that would be considered discrimination. So what you do is you provide them the list and say, hey, we need to verify your employment eligibility. Here's the list of acceptable documents you're able to present. Make sure you provide these to us, by your first day of hire, or, if you're verifying it before. Um, and they can provide you whatever documents they do have.
Gotcha. Okay, and a couple questions still on the CalSavers. I know this is something that people weren't aware of. So if you have over 50 employees, can they offer CalSavers, or do they have to? Because retirement funds, are they see, I'm not in the dark. I don't recall. Do you have to have a retirement fund when you reach a certain employees? I always thought you didn't, that was an option, or matching's an option. So correct me. I don't know where we are
No,
with
that
that.
is an option.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it is optional. And then the matching's optional as well. You can contribute up
That's what I
to
thought. Okay, that's still optional. Phew. Okay.
you're still up to date, Lori.
Okay.
Yeah, you can contribute. I think the max is, I want to say 6% or 8%, somewhere around there.
Somewhere
Um,
in that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's, yep.
and
Somewhere in there.
yeah, and so it is optional. But what, in the state of California, and we're seeing it in a couple other states actually implement similar plans. We just basically want to make sure people have enough towards retirement, because
Yeah.
we're finding a lot of people don't have a retirement plan.
Yeah,
And
in fact, we had a guest, I think it was last, I'm losing track of time, but he was in the evacuation zone. But David comes on and talks about retirement plans for employee, the owners of companies, right? And we're talking about, just start putting something away as a company owner and using it as a tax write-off as well, the advantages of that. So absolutely true. So Sadie, please do put Samara's upcoming webinar as well as her contact information in the chat. And in that, oh, I know, one trick question to you and then one comment for me. Okay. No, this is just
here it
it,
comes, here it comes, here it
there
comes.
it comes, there it comes. But this is a question that's always asked of me on a federal and a state level, and it becomes complicated on so many things. So when we always in our mind think workarounds, right? So I'm just going to hire a bunch of virtual employees. Is the state addressing how they look? I know. She's killing me. She's killing me. I know. And I have a hard time answering it too, because I have seen that they're addressing virtual and gig economy, but they're really not making clear delineation of what if we hire a virtual secretary admin. Are they making any statements on it yet?
You mean for AB5 purposes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
AB5, because a lot of people are trying to hire more virtual out of state while in state, and they're wondering how that apply. I waited till the
Yeah.
last because I know
Yeah.
it's a question.
Save
But
this,
you know what?
save
I'm
the
sure
best
you
for
get
last.
asked it too, and I don't
Yeah.
think we have a clear answer on that yet.
Yeah, I would tell you that so far the last thing I know about that is that if the employee, even if the employee is remote, out of state, but they have the ability to impact or make the business profitable or be an integral part of the business's operation here in California, they still need to be reported
I've
to
read some things
to
like that. Yeah.
EDD. Yeah.
You know what? It's interesting. It's following, and I'll explain to the audience, but it's getting away from nexus, the actual physical presence, and following the sales tax economic nexus methodology. Do you have an economic impact? Therefore, it applies to the rules like Nexus used to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're gonna hire virtually, I'd say hire out of the country.
Yeah, yeah. That's where it doesn't
Yeah.
because yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and so many people, I know so many people do that. I know businesses that have an entire team in Mexico and they run entire operations and things like that. Unfortunate um that sometimes people have to do that to be able to stay afloat. But another option would be like if you hire a
I
temporary
was going to say
employee,
staffing agencies, you can go
yeah,
through
through a
staffing.
staffing
You're paying a
agency.
little more, but you can that.
Yeah,
Although that's come under question too, I know.
yeah, I mean, some things you'll be like co-employer, and still have some responsibility for some things, like in particular for like sexual harassment, discrimination, all those laws. But the staffing agency takes the brunt of, what the employer would take, the responsibility that an employer would take. So,
You know what's
um,
interesting? Growing up in a small country community and being alive on planet Earth for many years, I watched as businesses had these kind of comments, we're having a problem competing with other countries. We're having a problem competing with outsourcing. We're having a problem now competing because of, internet. Over the years, there's been so many things that when I saw the mom and pop tire sales and my family grandparents in farming, from that to now the amount of obstacles and challenges that small businesses have come up against has been enormous, right? But at the end of the day, and this is what I want to say, at the end of the day, they kept thriving. They thrived because they became aware of the situation. They figured out what best worked for them. They maybe went into a different market, they went into a different selling price, they went into a different, state, what have you. They did all these
yeah,
things, right? But I think at the end of the day, as daunting as what we're talking about, it's just another situation that each entrepreneur has to assess. It's a fact,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
how to best structure their company. And I'm going to say something that people's mouths always drop when I say it. And so I'm just going to say it, Xiomara. I'm just going to say it.
I'm gonna back you up.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I'll say it first. Okay.
Okay, say it first.
I'll say it first. Let's test it. Sometimes it is better to not hire and not expand, but increase your price. You lose a few customers, but at the end of the day, you make more money. So growth just in, I got to get more sales. That means I got to hire more. That means I got to get infrastructure is not always the best strategy. Sometimes your market can take an increase in selling per unit price. You
Yeah.
end up with less sales, but the money that goes in your pocket to buy a quart of milk increases.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll add to that is that, I think my opinion is going to be even more outrageous. And I'm not, I'm not encouraging anyone to like break the law, but sometimes, maybe more profitable to pay the penalty
Yep.
than to
Well,
actually, you know,
there's truth to that because I have to admit that I have sat there before and said, well, this is the penalty. And if we don't do this, we go under. So we'll do this and pay the penalty. I have done that analogy before. It's called risk and
yeah,
risk assessment, and risk assessment covers all things because as much as we love as the human being to make life all nice and with a bow and a ribbon and all that, it's not. And
yeah,
we have to figure out how to work around
yeah.
things.
And this is why I will stress that businesses do become knowledgeable about HR because there are things you can do. There are resources. I don't want anyone to walk away from here thinking like, oh, I can't do business in the state of California
No,
anymore.
no,
That's not the case. There are things that you can do. There are workarounds, but you do need to have the knowledge. You need to have someone that is the expert being able to walk you through and put together like a plan or a strategy for you to mitigate risk, at the same time that you are also trying to be compliant with what is
totally.
required of you.
Totally, and I know we're going over and have to end here, but I for many years of my life was considered a very hardcore dangerous climber. I never saw it that way, but I was a rock climber, ice climber, high altitude climber. And there's so many times that I said, "Okay, this can happen. We could die in this capacity. We have an awareness of this. Now let's not let that happen." And those basic rules of survival feed into everyday life and business. It's an awareness and a complete awareness and acceptance, and then a conscious choice to follow a strategy, see if it's getting the results you want, and if not, change your approach and
Yeah,
not be a stork with the head in the sand. Be knowledgeable and conscious and make good decisions for you, your business, and your family. I think that's what it comes down to.
survival of the fittest.
It totally is. In fact, my newest line I keep saying I'm going to end. I don't think it's no longer survival of the fittest. I think it's survival of the most skeptic because skepticism causes you to research and ask questions. So my new line is I want to be the biggest skeptic on planet Earth because that allows me to constantly be inquiring new knowledge.
I agree. I agree
Well, we're
100%.
going to have you back on the show. Thank you so much, as always, to be here. I'm going to get Sadie back in. I know, Sadie, that was all over the place, wasn't that? Was that not an intense conversation, as always?
Well, I think my favorite, like it was like that one line that you said, I don't like that answer. I was like, preach, Lori,
I
preach.
don't like that answer. Can we have a new one, please? Well, I always say the show's about real people, real discussions, real situations, and honesty, and being able to express and ask the things that need to be expressed and asked. And I don't care what's happening around us, guys. We're going to go forth it. We're going to prosper. We're going to prosper as humans, as businesses, because we're going to have a conscious awareness and make good choices for ourselves, our family, our surrounding, our community, what have you. So I just want to, before we end, Sadie's going to stay behind and make sure all the information is in the chat. Sadie, restate Xiomara's webinar, so they have that. Also, please restate the way to sign up to the links for the disaster information that I'm giving on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 11 o'clock. Hopefully I got that right. I know there was some questions about it. I want to use that platform to address it. I'll be able to answer any and all questions about whether you get aid if you're in or out the disaster area. I saw people asking about that. I want to use that platform to address that. So I'll see all of you that want more information tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to have you come back on because I know there's more to cover, but please jump on her webinar so you get an update on everything.
Yeah, I'd be happy to be on anytime. So my pleasure.
Just a regular.
Thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out.
Okay, so everybody, I will see you next week on Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams. Bye, everybody.
Bye.